So while on my other escapades about the cards from the forbidden section, before we get into the limited section, let's take a look at some of the cards that I definitely think from the forbidden section could come off the list. Now there's a total of 15 of them compared to the others, because it's really hard to find 5 fusion of synchro monsters when there's not that many to choose from. And then the spells and traps you can put together, so I just decided to put what was left from the effect monsters, fusions, synchros, spells, and traps. So let's get right into it. Now, first off, we're going to be talking about 2 of them that kind of share the same aspect of what they both intended on doing when they both were legal. First up, we have the Tyrant Neptune, and along with that, Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom. These 2 cards do pretty much the exact same thing, being able to copy the effects of monsters that are in the graveyard or on the field, but with Tyrant Neptune, it gains the effect of a monster that was tributed for the tribute summon of this card. And this was ran in decks that was running the Lyrilisk Fusion monster and Instant Fusion, and the Fusion monster being Lyrilisk Independent Nightingale that was part of an FTK. So realistically, to kill 2 birds with 1 stone to bring back 2 cards, you could just bring back something like these 2 if you just ban Instant Fusion, and then a lot of the problems are solved. And they both were used in FTKs, but realistically nowadays they are very slightly impossible. Tyrant Neptune would kind of be possible in a Mitsurugi deck with the Aldotic monsters, but outside of that, there's really not much going for that. And Supreme King's Dragon Starving Venom is a card that I've been wanting back since we got Maze of the Masters and Age of Overlord. I mean, Maze of Millennia and Age of Overlord, since the new Zark stuff that we got. So realistically, I think it's long overdue that we get this back. And it kind of makes sense because I kind of want it to help push that. After that, let's take a look at other boss monsters, I should say, quote unquote, being Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King. OCG has this, I believe, at 1 or 2. It's at 2 in the OCGs. So realistically, I definitely think that this card could come back off the Forbidden Limited list finally, even though we still have Dragonic Diagram at 1. And realistically, it's not going to do anything because we have 1 diagram. So realistically, True Draco wouldn't do that much. But let's get into the next cards, because it's definitely going to get a little more interesting from here. Now, we have Block Dragon. This card can presumably come back because we don't have Appaloosa. We don't have things like Barone or Borreload Savage Dragon anymore, so a lot of decks that utilize those as a core features really don't work anymore, especially if we look at Supreme King Starving Venom, because you don't have that protection anymore. And this is another card that over time it will just get worse and worse. That is just going to sit on the Forbidden Limited list. It's even at 1 in the OCG, and that's all they needed to do was put it to 1, so Adamancipator could be at odds with everything else, even though they did lose Agido and Kelbeck, which, surprising, those cards are broken. Well, realistically, Block Dragon is just one of those cards that could definitely come back as time goes on, as if they want to push new Earth Rock monsters or a new Rock deck that utilizes it in a different way, where some cards are dark and other cards are earth, but we'll head and see on that, as that's another boost to things like Adamancipator or even the Verniself cards. Next up, we have another card that was dealt with FTKs long ago that aren't even good anymore, especially like Samsara Lotus. We have Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis. This was banned because of a bad plant FTK that utilized a lot of non once per turn plant monsters like Lone Fire Blossom, and it utilized a few things like Topologic Bomber Dragon with Nightmare Cerberus, but you also had another one with Trickstar Black Cat and Samsara Lotus, and Samsara Lotus has been at 3 ever since we got Phantom Nightmare. So it's definitely one of the cards that, in my opinion, could definitely come back and no one would use anymore, even though that people can tinker around with it. But we've just lost a lot of these powerful boss monsters that could protect you going into your FTKs. And it's not like we have 2 FTKs going to be legal here soon, as we have 1 still legal, and that is very nice to know. and we have the Catapult Turtle Tachyon FTK coming up in a couple months. So keep an eye on that, as that is probably one card I see getting banned in the near future. Now, one card a lot of people have been wanting back at legal status being Spiral Master Plan, as things get more out of hand with other things. Like, we're getting Bestials taking care of a lot of light and dark variant decks. Master Plan could definitely come off the Forbidden Limited list. It follows a pattern that they've been doing. Quick Fix came off, and Drones came off. Well, swap the two around. Resort came off. And now I think it's time to finally say Master Plan can come back. Spiral was a very powerful deck, and it's seen two different metas from the almost tier 0 status back in 2018 to meta play again in 2020. But realistically nowadays, I definitely think that Master Plan is super weak, even though it adds 3 cards off of 1. By once per turn, you can add a Spiral mission, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you can add a Resort and a Spiral monster. So it's like a Rainbow Bridge of Salvation, which honestly is very great for a card like this. But realistically, I definitely think that as time goes on, Master Plan will get weaker, and we already seen it in the OCG, people wanting to play Spiral, but it's really not working that well because of all the hand traps that we have now, like Nibiru, which was prevalent in this time where Spiral was legal for a little bit. But we also have things like Dominus Purge, Dominus Impulse. We have so many other hand traps. They released board breakers as well in the span of the past 5 years. It's kind of crazy that this thing's still not legal to play. Another card that I definitely think that could come off the list, because we've taken care of a few cards, we have Eclipse Wyvern. In tandem with the Dragon Ruler support, this doesn't help that, because the Xyz monsters are light and dark. The main deck little babies are light and dark that aren't level 7 or higher. This could help out things like Red Eyes again, which would be cool. Some of your Dragon Link style decks, but realistically, Dragon Link hasn't been doing much outside of Bestials with Primite and Fiendsmith, that this card definitely gets thrown out in the dust very fast. Even cards like Black Dragon Waverbuster, or Collapser, and White Dragon Waverbuster, both can be back at 3, along with Chaos Base. I'm going to mention that now. It feels like that a lot of these cards are just sitting there doing nothing. Sure, they could bring this card back, and it could probably do something, but you can also put a hard once per turn on the card, so it can't be utilized in multiples, which is absolutely fine, and people will try out 60 card variants of decks with it in to see what they could do. But realistically, I would rather just run Chaos Space and the Black and White Dragons as my starters with Starly Seyfert over this. Sure, you could send it off of a few cards here and there, but in my opinion, Eclipse Wyvern, as time goes on, it ages poorly, and they start designing around it like they have been. Like, look at things like the Dragon Rulers. They design those Xyz around this thing very, very specially, so it cannot work with them. And it could work with some things, but not everything. But that's how everything is nowadays. 2 cards that go hand in hand because they're both level 1 tuner monsters. Mind Master and Glow Bulb. Mind Master was part of a FTK long ago, but nowadays that FTK really became very inconsistent very fast. And along with that, Glow Bulb has just been rotting on the Forbidden Limited list for quite some time. Glow Bulb is at 3 in the OCG, and overall, it really doesn't see that much play outside of things like Tier Limit. So there's that. And if we look at older lists for the Mind Master FTK, I would have to say that it's not that good anymore, because there's a lot of cards in there that utilize things like Dark Strike Fighter, and that was the main purpose, I believe, in the FTK, because you would keep swapping around with things like Power Injector, Psychic Snail, and it's just it's not really that powerful anymore. And I definitely think that a card like this could come back because just over time, psychics just become weaker and weaker. Same for things like Glow Ball. This card was banned because Hulk of Fibrax. Hulk is gone. It's been gone since 2022. And realistically, I think it's time for this thing to come back because we got all the tuners back. Now, into the spell cards, we have Heavy Storm. OCG has this at 1. We have Feather Dust Illegal. We have 2 Lightning Storm. We have 3 MST, 3 Cosmic Cyclone, 3 Night Beam, 3 so many other, name this board wipe here, or spot removal here. And honestly, Heavy Storm can come back. It's just a double-sided Feather Duster. It could help you, it could hurt you. It depends on how much you play into it and how much you expect out of it. Going first, it's not that useful. Going second, it could be absolutely amazing. Just like how Feather Duster is. Where you get to activate this before activating anything, that's fine by me. And realistically, Heavy Storm, I see is fine, even today. But overall, it's just another back row removal that people will just side one of it. Or if they want to, they could play 2, or just main it, I mean, not 2. But outside of that, let's get to the next one. Brilliant Fusion. This card is for the new Geminite support. I definitely think it might come off the list because the new Geminite support kind of relies on this a little bit to go into certain plays to help enable your end board better, and you can OTK better, because a lot of people in the OCG, they went from the trying out the FTK to going to an more going second OTK deck. So kind of like how Tempai was, but realistically this is more combo oriented, and it goes with the Black Dragon that I mentioned earlier. So realistically, I do think that Brilliant Fusion can be fine to come back just because we have the new Geminite support coming out. And honestly, decks do what Brilliant Fusion do, but 10 times better now with how much power creeping consistency that's happened. Like Fiendsmith is in the meta. I would probably run my light target as Engraver, so I can get an Engraver to the graveyard. Or if I want to, try and do something like a Primite build with Imperium Dragon. But what am I to say on what to come back and what could not come back? But overall, Brilliant Fusion seems fine, especially in today's age, especially with things like Dominus Impulse, or we even have Ash Blossom that's been legal forever. And we also have things like Molcharmy, Purulia, Fuelos, and Meows now. So realistically, more time goes on, a lot of these cards become worse. And that's kind of like how Butterfly Dagger Elma is. Elma is one of those cards that was originally in Exodia FTK long ago, and it would just constantly loop with Magical Library and Gearfried the Iron Knight. But honestly, this is the one spell card that I could see them slapping a hard once per turn on it, so they can give proper equip spell guardian support in the future, because this is a fan favorite archetype and they really want support to the deck. And when we look at all the old Guardian cards, it's like Guardian Elma. This is the card that represents with Butterfly Dagger, where if it's normal or special summon, target an appropriate equip spell in your graveyard, equip it to this card. So it literally, if your dagger's in the graveyard and you have another on the field, normal, equip another dagger. So your dagger keeps coming back, giving you a resource loop with this card, so they can make it into the new support if they ever give Guardian a new support wave. But it's really hard supporting Guardian, especially when there's many cards that are Guardians. Like you have Metal Guardian, Guardian of the Throne Room, Winged Dragon, Guardian of the Fortress, Celtic Guardians are here, Guardian of the Fortress number 2, Guardian of the Labyrinth. Like there's so many Guardian cards, it's crazy. Like even the Gate Guardian stuff, it just goes into so much, and it's so sad because Guardian is just a whole messed up archetype that they really need to fix and work on, because even something like Guardian Seal is theoretically useful, sending a spell card you control to the graveyard to destroy a monster on the field is very good. Or Guardian Trice, even though it's a level 5. You could special summon the destroyed monster, or you can special summon the monster that you use for this card's tribute, which is good when it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, so you could summon something like a Guardian Grawl if you tribute it, because you could freely special summon this card from your... If it's the only card in your hand, you could special summon it from your hand if you control a Gravity Axe. So there are ways that you could do it, like you could special Guardian Grawl, tribute it for Trice if you have Twin Swords, and of course Grawl on the field. But I digress. Dagger definitely is one of those cards that could have come off the Forbidden list for quite some time, and I think it's now finally time to bring it back. Oh, just really, it's just sitting there. And now let's get into trap cards. Return from the different dimension, paying half your life points, special summon as many monsters that are banished, and it works on both sides of the field. Even though you can run it in things like Malice, realistically, I don't think you could run it in Malice because you're summoning back so much. But realistically, this could be a bad idea, and there's something I'm missing, like in Malice, where you could just summon out 5 monsters and then attack for game. But in a lot of other decks, you could summon back so many monsters as well. But it's just one of those trap cards that I definitely think, just off the top of my head, because we've seen it before played in decks like Dragon Ruler, but nowadays they're kind of slower than they once were. And that kind of leads into the next card being like something trapped with Dust Shoot. It's only good going first if your opponent doesn't hand trap you twice. So if your opponent gets to hand trap you 3 times, this card's dead. If they hand trap you twice, it's still alive during the draw phase, but they still have priority, so they can discard, like, draw. Oh, I can activate my effect. Cool. Do you have anything in response? I have 3 cards in my hand, and this card's dead. So realistically, I do think Trap Dust Shoot could be one of those cards that could come off the Forbidden Limited list in due time with how the format's going. And even then, decks like Labyrinth will play it, because look at Time Seal. It's the exact same thing, where you have a card that says, oh, skip your opponent's draw phase. Okay. We're not going to play it because we have better trap cards. This is look at your opponent's hand, rip a card, and return to the deck. Okay, cool. We have better cards, like Eradicator Epidemic Virus, or Deck Devastation Virus, or even Grinning Grave Virus. There are better options to what this card is in decks like Labyrinth. So realistically, this card could potentially come back to 1 in tomorrow, and not many would play it. Even though it seems good on paper, it's bad in practice, even though we have things like Triple Tactics Talent being legal that does its job better because it's on a spell card. And finally, the card that's been on the Forbidden Limited list for quite some time, Ultimate Offering. Pay 500, you can immediately normal summon or set 1 monster after you resolve this effect. Honestly, this is worse Floowandery. They made Ultimate Offering into Floowanderies, and I could definitely think that this card is safe to come back off the Forbidden Limited list, especially nowadays with how fast things are and all that. But I wanted you guys to think about these options that I presented today, and these are all currently forbidden in the TCG, from Tyrant Neptune to Starving Dragon to Block Dragon to Eclipse Wyvern. But anyways, I've been Bolt Spider. I hope you guys did enjoy this video, and I'll see you all in the next video.